Young Jennifer, and this is Arirang News special coverage of the joint news conference following the first in-person summit between South Korean President Moon Jae-in and U.S. President Joe Biden. It's about 10 to 6:30 a.m. here in Seoul and 10 to 5:30 p.m. on the other side of the globe in Washington, D.C. And we're about 10 to 15 minutes away from witnessing the first ever bilateral summit joint news conference between the two presidents. And we do have a live coverage of the press conference ahead. But before that, to offer us some perspective throughout this live coverage, we have joining us live in the studio, Dr. Ko Myung-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Dr. Go, it's great to see you so early in the morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Right. So this is the first bilateral summit, a series of summits which started off with a one-on-one and then a small group bilateral summit and then an expanded one between South Korean President Moon Jae-in and U.S. President Joe Biden. President Moon is the second leader to be greeted by Joe Biden since he took office at the White House. What are you looking into this summit?
So I think it's very important and significant, not just beyond the symbolic value that President Moon Jae-in is the second foreign leader in meeting with U.S. President Biden. I think it shows that the United States is putting a lot of weight in its relationship with South Korea. So I think this is a very pivotal meeting for the both leaders, especially for President Moon in the sense that this is the last year of his presidency, and we know that one of the important vector of it, one of the important areas of it is a legacy, which will be the success of the North Korea policy, is in a limbo right now, and then he would like to use this opportunity to essentially jumpstart the stalled process of dialogue between, not just between the two Koreas, but also between Washington and Pyongyang. So I think a North Korean issue is going to be high up in the agenda items between the two leaders, as well as the issue of the COVID-19. As President Moon would like to get some sort of assurance from the United States government that it will be South Korea will be supplied with a significant amount of additional doses of COVID-19 vaccines, because South Korea, despite the fact that it's been very successful in implementing quarantine policy, it's been lagging behind when it comes to vaccination for the general public. So I think that's going to be another important item. For President Biden, obviously, this is besides the symbolic value of showing its respect, and then for the important nation allies such as South Korea, I think President Biden would like to count on President Moon's commitment to U.S. policy towards China. So I think a Quad could be an important discussion item for the two leaders.
Right. The bilateral summit, which was the one-on-one, let's start with, which was supposed to last about 20 minutes or so, it went overboard and lasted about double that time. And President Biden, during the expanded summit, during which there was a pool spray, press pool spray during the opening of session of that, said that, the two leaders were speaking frankly and casually about all different issues, and his staff kept coming in and interrupting them, telling them that time was over, but the leaders had much to say. And so the entire summit, 3 series of summits, were lengthened than anticipated. What do you think they had to say? Because there had been a lot of issues that had to be discussed going into the summit, not only on North Korea, but this time around there was that semiconductor issue, chip shortage, supply chains. There had been that vaccine, climate change. So a whole range of issues that had to be discussed and ironed out. Of course, the issue of U.S.'s presence in the Indo-Pacific region, as the U.S. State Department as well as the U.S. White House said, will be on the agenda. So the two leaders had much to discuss this time around.
Oh, no doubt. But what's also interesting about this summit is that a little bit different from the previous summit. This summit has been a little bit of a transactional kind of a meeting, in the sense that the President Biden had a lot to ask from the South Korean president because, for instance, the Indo-Pacific issue is a controversial issue in South Korea because of Seoul's relationship with Beijing, and Beijing has been warning South Korea not to be too eager to join the Quad, which China sees as a way for the United States to contain China. And also for President Moon, because as I mentioned earlier, in order to strengthen his legacy in terms of inter-Korean relations, he would like President Biden to be a lot more proactive in engaging North Korea. And so in that sense, this is a very transactional summit. I think President Moon went to Washington with the mindset that he'll offer incentives to the United States to give South Korea something that President Moon wants. So I think that's the reason why, probably one of the reasons why the whole meetings got prolonged, because we're talking about very sensitive issues for both sides and critical issues.
Right. So that's what President Moon wanted going into the summit. I'm sure there was a lot that President Biden wanted and needed out of this summit as well. Of course, President Moon traveled with a huge business delegation, the biggest 4 conglomerates here in South Korea, and they vowed to a huge investment earlier in the day. So what did President Biden want going into the summit, and do you think he got what he wanted?
So I think President Moon went to Washington with a big gift package, I would say. I think President Moon delivered President Biden promises of significant investments in the infrastructure, as well as the fourth industrial revolution, next cutting-edge technologies such as in batteries, biological productions, as well as biopharmaceutical productions, as well as semiconductors. So I think the 4 Korean conglomerates that accompanied President Moon on his trip essentially spearheads this South Korea's involvement in helping President Biden to carry out his platform of making the United States more secure in terms of a supply chain, as well as in being at the forefront of the cutting-edge technologies. So I think President Biden was very much satisfied with this. But in addition to that, I think President Biden would like to see more political commitment on the part of Seoul to the Indo-Pacific strategy that the U.S. administration is pursuing right now.
Right. Earlier in the day, President Moon became the first foreign leader to attend a Medal of Honor ceremony. President Biden actually presented the first Medal of Honor to the highest degree as president to a Korean War veteran, and President Moon was in attendance. Do you put any meaning or significance on that?
So I think it's very significant. I mean, all summits are essentially acts of symbolism, and this one was very essential in the delivering message to around the world that both the United States and South Korea are actually come from a long history of alliance. I mean, the Medal of Honor recipient had his Medal of Honor because of his combat experience in the Korean War. And we know President Moon's origin story, so to speak, is very famous in the sense that he's a son of North Korean refugees who escaped to South Korea, and their escape was only facilitated because of the sacrifices made by the U.S. soldiers. So I think this is very symbolic, and also it sends a message to China that South Korea, despite the fact that it seems to be a little bit lukewarm about strengthening the relationship, essentially siding with the United States in the current standoff between Beijing and Washington. But then South Korea, no doubt, is a pro-American country. So I think this is a very strong message to China in many ways.
Right, so it was a show of South Korea-U.S. ironclad alliance. And of course, President Moon also visited the Arlington National Cemetery for the first time. And this is not his first visit to the U.S., of course. All right, let's now look at what the president had in his itinerary ahead of the South Korea-U.S. summit. President Moon, like Dr. Go and I discussed, participated in a Medal of Honor ceremony with U.S. President Joe Biden. And earlier in the day, he also held talks with the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, as well as with business leaders of both countries. Here's our Blue House correspondent, Hong Yu.
President Moon Jae-in met U.S. President Joe Biden face-to-face for the first time on Friday at a Medal of Honor ceremony. Biden had invited Moon to join the ceremony, during which he awarded Korean War veteran Ralph Puckett with the Medal of Honor, making Moon the first foreign leader to participate in the White House honor. The two leaders showed their highest courtesy toward Colonel Puckett, who had led his Rangers through enemy counterattacks even after being wounded by a hand grenade. And they used the occasion to reaffirm the ironclad alliance between South Korea and the U.S.
참전 용사들의 용기와 희생, 우정을 영원히 기억할 것입니다. 영웅들의 피로 맺어진 한미동맹은 한반도를 넘어 평화와 번영의 핵심 축이 되었습니다.
The strength of the alliance between the United States and the Republic of Korea was born out of the courage, determination, sacrifice, and of the Korean troops fighting shoulder to shoulder with American troops. And having you here today is an important recognition of all that our nation has achieved together, both of them, in the decade since.
Earlier in the day, President Moon met with U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. Moon said South Korea shares the same values as its ally, the U.S., and will cooperate with the U.S. in the recovery from COVID-19 and for denuclearization and permanent peace on the Korean Peninsula. Harris reflected that their alliance plays an important role for peace, security, and prosperity in Northeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific region. President Moon also sat down for talks with economic leaders of both countries on Friday in efforts to improve the supply chain of key industries such as semiconductors, batteries, and biotech by expanding investment and trade between the two countries.
최근 코로나 위기를 계기로 글로벌 공급망의 취약성이 드러나고 있습니다. 보다 안정적인 공급망이 필요하고 상호 보완적인 산업 구조를 갖춘 양국 간 경제 협력이 더욱 중요해졌습니다. 시너지가 가장 클 것으로 기대되는 분야는 반도체, 배터리, 바이오 산업입니다.
South Korean companies that took part in the meeting announced their plans to invest in the U.S. Samsung Electronics announced a $17 billion investment to establish a new foundry factory. Battery companies LG Energy Solution and SK Innovation announced around $14 billion of investment, and Hyundai Motors announced more than $7 billion of investment in EV production and charging infrastructure. South Korea's industry minister Moon Sung-wook, who was at the meeting, said the announcement shows the companies are preparing a bridgehead to dominate the U.S. market with a preemptive investment in response to the U.S. market environment, such as strengthening supply chains and responding to climate change. 홍유, Arirang News.
So that's what the president had earlier in the day. But of course, the president had a bilateral summit with the U.S. president, first in-person bilateral summit with the president of the United States. And they have concluded their one-on-one summit, their small group summit, and the expanded summit, which lasted well over their anticipated time. And they're now making the final tune. They're fine-tuning the joint statement, which will be released in moments' time at a joint news conference. And we will be bringing you a live coverage of that. And of course, in the studio, I have Dr. Ko Myung-hyun, our Senior Research Fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Dr. Go, so a lot will be on the table or have been on the table at the talks, and they are fine-tuning the details, but I'm sure even ahead of the summit talks, before the summit talks, all of the details would have been already ironed out between the working level officials. And there had been talks about South Korea becoming a hub for vaccine manufacturing. What do you think would have been agreed between the two leaders in terms of that?
So I think the joint statement is going to be composed about two major sections. One is about South Korea's commitment to the Quad. I mean, we know that's coming, but then we're not so sure how explicit South Korea's commitment will that be in terms of a text. So that's going to be interesting to watch out for. And another section is going to be about the Biden administration's formation of the North Korea policy. I mean, the Biden administration officials have said that they are going to reveal more details of the outcome of the policy review that they've conducted since earlier this year. So it's going to form the basis of the Biden administration's policy towards North Korea. Is that something that not just the experts in North Korea are watching out, but also North Korea, I think, is waiting for these details to emerge. So I think this joint statement is going to be very significant in showing the future direction of the Biden administration's North Korea policy, as well as the South Korea's policy towards the Quad. So I think these are going to be the two major components of the joint statement that's going to come out soon.
Of course, when we look at the topic agendas that would have been discussed by the two presidents, they do coincide with the agenda of the Quad. And so it is, in essence, safe to say that South Korea and the U.S. are participating in a Quad-like form. However, when asked about this question, U.S. White House spokesperson Jen Psaki said that Quad, mathematically means 4, and that there will not be another member coming in the near future. Do you think that means that there has not been an invite out there?
So I think the invite's been there before, just that South Korea didn't take it. I mean, at least not in the form that people perceive Quad to be as a way for the United States to contain China. That's very, in a way, very provocative for the Chinese, and something that South Korea is very mindful of. So it's true that the Quad as a present form might not change in terms of nomenclature, but then when it comes to substance, there's plenty of room for South Korea to contribute there. We know that Quad is being Quad started out as a security arrangement first. I mean, it wasn't a explicit security arrangement, but also a forum for dialogue between the 4 countries that compose the Quad: United States, Japan, India, and Australia. But I think it has evolved into a regional architecture where they can incorporate more other substantial issues, such as supply chain issues, climate change, humanitarian issues as well. So I think that's something that South Korea will be very much happy to contribute to. So I think even though South Korea is going to stay out of the Quad in a small form or the more core form, South Korea has plenty of space for participation, and that's something that it's going to come out explicitly in the upcoming joint statement.
There are also talks that there will be revisions to South Korea's missile range. What do you think, why is it now that these kind of agreements are happening, and what do you think the U.S. has in mind going forward?
So even though I think the South Korean government would like to depict this as a major concession that they have gained from the Biden administration, I think the transformation of the missile guidelines has been taking place well before. We have seen like a first signs of that under the Trump administration, where the missile range, the limit on missile range on the indigenously developed South Korean missiles to expand from 500 kilometers to 800 kilometers. So now the talk is that the United States will agree with South Korea to lift completely that limit, essentially allow South Korea to, even theoretically speaking, develop intercontinental ballistic missiles. But then I think it's a part of the comprehensive United States security strategy in East Asia. We are seeing that China and North Korea are raising their level of threat when it comes to their missile capability. And the United States would very much like its Asian allies to counteract such a threat. But we have to take into consideration that Japan, because of its peace constitution, is unable to match the growing threat coming from China and North Korea. So only option left for the United States in terms of alliance and partnership is South Korea, which comes with the industrial and technological capability to do so. So I think the revision to the missile guidelines reflects the change in strategic thinking on the part of Washington.
White House spokesperson Jen Psaki said there will be some sort of an address by the two leaders in the joint statement regarding Taiwan and the China issues in the framework of the Indo-Pacific strategy. Of course, South Korea would have to, I suppose, make this a very delicate dance, if you will, as it's always been sandwiched between the U.S. and China. And some experts say that it's no longer a wise decision for South Korea to be ambiguous about its decision between the two. How do you think that would have been tuned?
So, for instance, Prime Minister Suga, who had the earlier summit with President Biden, agreed to include explicit mention of Taiwan issue and the joint statement between Japan and the United States. So I think the United States would very much like South Korea to follow suit, but I don't think South Korea is going to commit to that or side to any side when it comes to Taiwan issue. If South Korea does that, it's going to represent a radical digression from the current South Korea's posture of strategic ambiguity when it comes to the conflict between Washington and Beijing. So I'll be very much surprised if South Korea does that. So what's most likely is that South Korea and the United States will agree to essentially refer to the China and Taiwan issue, and then probably wrap it in the framework of common values and principles. That's probably the extent to which South Korea would go at this moment.
And heading into the summit, President Biden, what he wanted was to ask South Korea, or to, in a sense, pressure South Korea to level up its commitment regarding climate change. What do you think they would have discussed, and do we expect an outcome on that front?
So definitely, I mean, that's something that South Korea is very much eager to agree with the United States. There will be no much of a disagreement between the two sides when it comes to climate change. South Korea would be very happy to abide by the Paris Accord and then reduce its CO2 emissions. And then it's also important for South Korea because it has implications for its industrial and economic policies. So South Korea is transitioning towards a more green in the economic system. So I think. And then it's based on the different, emergence of new technologies and application of those technologies to the industrial base. So I think there will be more announcements in terms of partnerships for electrification of the automobiles and the infrastructure. And that it will be interesting to see whether they're going to include that in the joint statement.
Right. So we'll have to wait and see. But it's really not conventional that we see so many different topics, in a wide range of topics being on the table between the two leaders of these two countries, because it's been the case that it was mostly focused on North Korea issues and security issues in the traditional sense. And it really occurs to me that the security really has expanded to different realms as now, shortage in chips, semiconductors, climate change, vaccines, COVID-19, all these different issues have emerged as a topic of the bilateral summit.
So that's actually it coincides with the major shift in the technology as well as social dynamics in the United States. The United States had a very abrupt policy transition between President Trump and President Biden. President Trump was against climate change, implementing measures against climate change, whereas President Biden is very much pro, implementing measures for those to mitigate the impact of climate change. So that actually has implications for the U.S. policy towards the economy as well as the industrial policies. And South Korea has emerged as an important actor when it comes to mitigating the impact of climate change, as well as the fact that South Korea is a supplier of cutting-edge technologies, not just the United States, but all the major economies in the world today. So I think that has expanded the discussion items on the agenda between the two countries. And also another important issue is that we are right now going through a critical moment where the consensus that has maintained stability in the world stage has broken down in many ways. So China is now perceived as a rising threat to the existing liberal international order, and the United States essentially finally stepping up and trying to counteract that. So I think all these major dynamics that are taking place at the same time are being reflected on the agenda items that are being discussed today.
Right. Another thing is about immediate challenges or urgency that President Moon brings to the United States is, of course, not only North Korea, but of course, vaccine supply. President Moon is under pressure to force the U.S. to supply the stopgap vaccine supply. And there had been questions raised in the U.S. about the equity issue, whether South Korea is appropriate receiver of these vaccine supply that should otherwise go to poorer nations or those that have the pandemic out of control, because South Korea by no means is out of control, right?
Exactly.
So whether that will be an issue.
So definitely, I mean, there's a contradiction between South Korea asking to have a priority when it comes to vaccine supply by the United States, where apparently there's a surplus of vaccines, and then the U.S. government has already committed to supplying 80 million doses of extra vaccines to the countries that are in need. Because South Korea, as you mentioned, has been very successful in containing the spread of the disease, and it's been exemplified in many ways, and then also considered to be a paragon of successful public health policies around the world. So there's a contradiction there, but at the same time, I mean, there are economic implications here for not just for the South Korean economy, but also for the U.S. economy to get back to normal. We need to resume the trade and the people-to-people exchanges and restore those levels to restore those activities to the previous levels. And for that, what we need right now is a massive vaccination campaigns in both countries, and I think that's actually being reflected on the request made by South Korea, not just by South Korea, but also by Japan.
You know, another thing that as I'm looking at the footage here, B-roll here of the expanded summit that happened just about half an hour or so ago, what do you see, Dr. Go? I see all these two world leaders and their chief aides not wearing mask-free for once.
So we know that President Biden has issued an order lifting the recommendation to wear masks indoors, and we are getting back to normal. I mean, we've been wearing masks for such a long time, for more than a year and a half. So wearing masks all the time was essentially considered to be the new normal. So I think this is a very good, great optics, I would say.
Right, and I'm hearing that we are very near to the start of the joint press conference in the East Room in the White House. And if we can see the footages there, we will be getting the live feed from the East Room in the White House. I think we are getting it from there. We'll have to wait a little bit, but the joint news conference between Presidents Moon and Biden on what they have agreed from the series of summits today will be announced during the joint news conference. Now, the joint news conference will begin with statement by the two leaders separately, and then will be followed by taking questions from the press. The traveling press from South Korea, of course, limited in number because of COVID-19 pandemic, and the Washington White House press. We're hearing and seeing, I am seeing Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan already taking their seats. Kirk Campbell seems to be there as well. They're all getting ready to attend the joint news conference, and they're busy taking their seats and getting ready for the joint news conference. In fact, one of the South Korean officials traveling with the president has said that what we will witness during the joint news conference and the joint statement will mark a watershed moment in South Korea-U.S. alliance and South Korea-U.S. partnership going forward. So we will wait and see what it is that they have to disclose during this joint news conference. We are seeing Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking to Foreign Minister Jong-un, who actually interviewed with PBS last night. He had much to say about North Korea policy review about Biden administration, and he was pretty content about the Biden administration's policy review and how it reflected a lot of South Korea's policy and opinions about North Korea. So he looked seem pretty content about that. Now, what you're seeing on the screen is the East Room in the White House, where the joint news conference between Presidents Moon and Biden will be taking place. You are seeing the East Room in the White House. The joint news conference between Presidents Moon and Biden will be taking place in just a little bit, in just seconds from now, that is. And this is Arirang News special live coverage of the South Korea-U.S. summit and the first ever in-person summit between Presidents Moon and Biden. President Moon said during the expanded summit that this was a chance for the two leaders to reaffirm the rock-hard, ironclad South Korea-U.S. alliance. And President Biden also said that it's a linchpin of security here in the Asia-Pacific region. We will be seeing the two leaders walk in to the East Room there, and there we are. We're seeing chief aides of both sides seated there in the East Room, and they're all busy getting prepared. There we're seeing the press coming in, and they will be taking questions from the press. That's a little in a very organized manner, because I remember when I traveled with the president during the previous U.S. administration, we didn't have an organized presser like that. It was more of a press pool spray where the previous president, President Trump, took questions as he just took questions at a very lengthy period of time. But we have an organized press conference this time around. And in that sense, it reflects President Biden's, I suppose, decades of service in not only in the Senate, but as the vice president of that country for 8 years, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yep. So we are seeing more order back in the United States.
Just like the masks, so we're back to the normal.
Yeah, back to the normal. And just to add on to that, President Moon actually visited the Roosevelt Museum, was it, on the first day that he was here. And I think it was to highlight the New Deal policy, where FDR really brought America to where it is now, economically, socially, and politically, out of the Great Depression, and using his New Deal policy. And I think President Moon wanted to see for himself the model that he has used for his Korean New Deal as he tries to, bring the economy back from the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and really revive the economy. And of course, President Joe Biden's role model is FDR as well.
So that's not surprising. I think there's a parallel between President Biden and FDR, in the sense that each president was bringing out the American society from a major shock, the Great Depression for FDR and the COVID-19 pandemic for President Biden. And also they would like to reorient the American economy from having too much focus on the market system towards a more straight intervention by the state. So I think there are very close parallels between the two presidents.
Right, and in doing so, President Biden is putting a lot of emphasis on, bringing back businesses back to America, bringing back and promoting investments in America, and the supply chain and chip shortages and semiconductors. And he essentially, holding a wafer in his hand, declared a rivalry against China.
Yeah, so those are like essentially reflections of the return of industrial policy in the United States. And the United States has been very, I would say, averse to increasing the state intervention in the economy for a very long time. I think the last time the United States government had practiced industrial policy at such a scale was the 70s and the 80s. And these were gone by the time the Cold War ended. So I think it shows that the industrial policy in the United States is a security dimension, and I think it's very closely tied with the emergence of a peer competitor. So back in the Cold War was the Soviet Union, and now it's China. And then it's an indication that this attitude is going to be it's not going to be temporary, but it's going to be long-lasting, and that's something to take into consideration for allies such as South Korea.
Right. So what you are seeing on your screen is the East Room in the White House, where presidents of South Korea and the United States will stand in just minutes or seconds from now to announce the outcome, perhaps a joint statement from their first in-person bilateral summit. And we will be seeing the presidents of the United States and South Korea walk in, and they are walking in. We are seeing their chief aides and the press stand to greet the two presidents walk into the East Room to make a joint statement. There we see President Moon Jae-in and President Joe Biden of the United States of America. Let's listen in to the joint statement.
Please be seated. Today I've been honored to welcome to the White House President Moon, and I got an opportunity to spend some private time with him as well as with our delegations. It's only the second head of state to visit and the White House since I've been president, and it's been a real joy. It's a reflection of how much we value the 70-year alliance with the Republic of Korea and how essential we know the relations is to the United States, the future of the Indo-Pacific region, and quite frankly to the world. Today has been particularly special because this afternoon, in addition to our bilateral meetings, President Moon participated in a ceremony right in this room that awarding the Medal of Honor to a veteran of the Korean War, a true American hero, Colonel Ralph Puckett, Jr. And I want to thank you again, Mr. President, for joining us. It was special. I don't know that there's ever been an award of the Medal of Honor with the head of state of the country where the award was won. It meant a great deal to me and to the family and to our country. And but today not only been an affirmation of our shared history of sacrifice that binds the Republic of Korea and the United States together, it's a commitment to expanding cooperation and shaping our shared future in accordance with our democratic values that have made our nation strong and agile and highly competitive in the 21st century's economies. The Republic of Korea and the United States are both nations built on innovation, and we must both meet the challenges facing us today and look to what is possible for tomorrow. Our partnership is grounded on our ironclad commitment to shared security. Our alliance has long been the linchpin of peace, security, prosperity, and the region growing more prominent and us being together. I was grateful that our two nations were able to quickly conclude a new cost-sharing agreement for forces in Korea in March, which will benefit both our peoples. And I thank again the President for that agreement. Today, we made important progress on a range of issues. We spoke about the shared approach to the Democratic People's Republic in Korea and continuing thread of the DPRK's nuclear and missile programs. My team consulted closely with President Moon's team throughout the process of our DPRK review, and we both are deeply concerned about the situation. Our two nations also share a willingness to engage diplomatically with the DPRK to take pragmatic steps that will reduce tensions as we move toward our ultimate goal of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Today, I affirm to President Moon that the United States will proceed in close consultation with the Republic of Korea in our strategy and our approach. And to help drive all these efforts, I'm pleased to announce that Ambassador Sung Kim, a career diplomat and with deep policy expertise, will serve as the U.S. Special Envoy for the DPRK. Ambassador Kim, you're here somewhere today. Stand up, will you? Thank you for being willing to do this. Thank you for taking on this important role. We appreciate it very much. The U.S.-ROK partnership also extends beyond the goals of the peninsula. We address issues of regional and global concern through stronger cooperation with partners in the region, including the ASEAN, the Quad, and trilateral cooperation with Japan. The multilateral cooperation is particularly important to coordinate an approach to the situation that exists in Burma as we work to pressure the junta to restore democracy for the people of Burma, and to address issues critical to regional stability, such as maintaining freedom of navigation in the South China Sea and preserving peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits. Today, we also discussed ways that the Republic of Korea and the United States will work together to address the challenges of our time, beginning with our efforts to end the COVID-19 pandemic globally. We agreed to establish a comprehensive vaccine partnership to expand the manufacture of vaccines that have been approved safe and effective, and we can scale up global vaccine supplies. We'll strengthen our ability to fight the pandemic and respond to future biological threats. When it comes to fighting climate change, the Republic of Korea and the United States are committed to making ambitious 2030 targets aligned with the effort to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions no later than 2050. And we're going to work together both to mobilize climate finance for developing countries and to make sure that international financing is aligned to promote our climate goals. We also talked about how to harness our nation's technological advantages to ensure the Republic of Korea and the United States are cooperating to shape emerging technologies around our shared value system. This includes everything from strengthening our cybersecurity to deepening our cooperation to build out an open, secure G5 network, or 5G network, I should say. I'm talking about the G5, it's another organization. I'm thinking organization, Mr. President, to secure the 5G networks. And I'm particularly gratified that so many leading South Korean companies see the benefits of investing in the United States, including this morning's announcement of more than $25 billion in new investments from Samsung, Hyundai, SK, and LG. I understand the executives of those companies here. Would you please stand up? Thank you, thank you, thank you, and I think we'll do great work together. These new investments are going to create thousands of good-paying jobs and jobs of the future right here in the United States. And they're going to help fortify and secure the supply chains for things like semiconductors and electric batteries. I know, as I said, that the CEOs made the effort not only to do this, but to be here today, and again, I thank them for being here. I thank you for making the investments in our future and yours. Finally, I want to note that yesterday I had the honor of signing into law the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act to help Americans of Asian descent from having to live in fear just walking down the streets of the United States. Quite frankly, I've been ashamed at the way some Americans have responded. And there's a long history in this country of contributions of Asian Americans being overlooked, forgotten, and ignored. And I affirm to President Moon today what I said yesterday, that we're committing and we're going to stay committed to stopping the hatred based on this bias. I promise you. Our people share a long history. Our soldiers have fought alongside one another. Our scientists work side by side in both our countries. Our students study together, share ideas, and seed new opportunities for future collaboration. And our people-to-people and cultural connections are only growing. And K-pop fans are universal. Now, I can tell those who laugh know what I'm talking about. Well, anyway, I'll get back to that later. Anyway. The Korean actress took home an Oscar for supporting actors this year, following up on the 4 Oscar wins for the movie Parasite last year. And so our two countries, our two nations have the tools and the deep connections that we need to make even stronger alliances and stronger cooperation. And I want to thank you again for the meetings today, Mr. President, particularly our long private meeting. I appreciated that a great deal. And I'm looking forward to working closely with you and your team as we expand and strengthen our efforts to shape the future together. And I mean that literally, to shape the future together. So thank you. Mr. President.
바이든 대통령님과
President Biden and Vice President Harris, I would like to first again extend my deepest gratitude for your warm hospitality. And today we sat face to face, and we believe that this gives the sign to our residents, the signs for us to overcome the COVID-19, and it also signals a very important moment of alliance between the two countries, especially dating back to 139 years ago. And also today we have had many hours spent between President Biden and I. We had private talks, small group talks, and expanded summits, and we talked as friends. And we dealt with very diverse topics, including climate change, democracy in the global era, and also we affirmed that we are absolutely on the same page. We once again reaffirmed our steadfast ROK-US alliance, and also we have reaffirmed our co-vision of expanding this alliance going forward. And the trust between President Biden and I have served as the ground to elevate our ties going forward and also elevate our alliance going forward. And the most important challenge that we need to solve together is the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and eternal peace. Not long ago, the Biden administration has come to a conclusion in terms of North Korean policy review. And based on the previous agreements like Singapore Declaration, the Biden administration has highlighted the importance of a pragmatic approach towards North Korea. I welcome his approach. And in the process of review, we have had close coordination, and I would like to send high appraisal for this. And especially for the Ambassador Sung Kim, I would like to also welcome President Biden's appointment of him as the U.S. Special Envoy to North Korea. We believe that this will also initiate talks between North Korea and the U.S., and this also signals Washington's strong commitment to re-engage in North Korean dialogue. And thus, I have high hopes for future negotiations going forward. And President Biden and I also reaffirmed that the talks based on peace between the Washington and North Korea could also facilitate our goals and targets on the Korean Peninsula. And we also shared our support for close cooperation on the inter-Korean ties development. And based on the North Korea and U.S. talks, we hope sincerely that we could also engage inter-Korean talks as well. And for the future as well, we will also engage in close coordination and close cooperation as well as communication. I look forward for the North Korea to engage in as well. And only when we have robust security can we make peace available. And the President Biden and I also agreed to enhance our ties and security ties, and we once again reaffirmed our commitment to the option transfer. And we also welcome the termination of and the abolishment of the missile guidelines. And also we believe that this once again shows the steadfast alliance between the ROK and the U.S. And during the summit, President Biden and I also talked upon many issues on the new emerging areas, especially to fight climate change. First, at the current moment, we face the task of ending the COVID-19 pandemic, and together with the U.S. high technology and also the South Korea's ability to manufacture vaccines, we have agreed to establish a partnership on COVID-19 vaccines. And the two countries going forward will expand the vaccine supply going forward and also contribute to the vaccine supply globally. And we will also cooperate in the initiative of the multilateral initiative, that is, to carry out the welfare and health cooperation going forward to fight any diseases going forward. And in this process, there has been a very important announcement that has been made. The U.S., especially President Biden, I also want to thank him for the vaccine support for South Korea. I believe that this specific announcement has also expanded the scope of our alliance to include the welfare sector as well. And second, in the sectors of the batteries and semiconductors, as well as the biopharmacies, we also agreed to carry out continued cooperation. And with the advancement of the digital era and the acceleration of the digital era, we are seeing more importance of such cooperation. The two countries, in order to tackle the challenges in the COVID-19, we will be enhancing our partnership in space, also as well as other sectors as well. And we also engage to forge ties and cooperation to also strengthen the nuclear power cooperation. And third, we will also bolster our ties to fight climate change. And the two countries are leading the Global Climate Change Initiative. And in April, the U.S. has carried out the Climate Change Summit. And next week in South Korea, we will have the P4G Summit held in Seoul. And together with this, we would also like to highlight the opportunity to engage in these commitments. And President Biden will also joining us virtually in the P4G talks. And I welcome that approach as well. And I look forward to your support and your commitment. And President Biden and I also had the honor of the medal awarding ceremony for the Korean veteran, especially the Colonel Raf Jr. And I would like to also extend my deepest gratitude for the alliance and the support that the U.S. has shown. And I was also confident in the future that will be shaped by by South Korea and the U.S. And together we have also agreed and reaffirmed that our meeting today will serve as a new landmark for the future relationship between the two countries. I once again extend my deepest appreciation to Mr. Biden. I would like to engage in deep dialogue and communication going forward with you. Last but not least, yesterday in Israel and Hamas, we have seen the agreement of the ceasefire, and I was very fortunate to see this, and I also like to highly appraise Mr. Biden's efforts. Thank you very much.
Well, the first question, I'm told, is Mary Alice Parker, ABC.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. What is your message to Democrats who want you to be more confrontational with Israel, and specifically to those that are saying that there should be an end to arms sales? I mean, do you recognize that there's been a shift, an evolution in your party, Mr. President, in the last 20 years on this issue? And I have a question for President Moon, but I can wait, or I can ask them.
There is no shift in my commitment to the security of Israel, period. No shift, not at all. But I tell you what there is a shift in. The shift is that we still need a two-state solution. It is the only answer, And what I'm convinced of is that we can now move, as I did even before I was able to negotiate, before the ceasefire was negotiated, that I made it clear that I spoke with President Abbas. We're going to make sure that we are going to provide for security in the West Bank, and we renewed the security commitment, as well as economic commitment to the people on the West Bank. I also indicated to the Israelis that I thought it was very important that they stop in Jerusalem this intercommunal fighting that is by extremes on both sides. It has to end. It has to end. And I'm prepared to put together, and I'm going to attempt to put together, a major package with other nations who share our view to rebuild the homes, and without re-engaging, without providing Hamas the opportunity to rebuild their weapon systems, rebuild the Gaza, rebuild Gaza. And they need the help, and I'm committed to get that done. And so I don't And I think that, my party still supports Israel. Let's get something straight here. Until the region says unequivocally they acknowledge the right of Israel to exist as an independent Jewish state, there will be no peace.
Can I ask a question to President Moon? I'm curious if the two of you have offered any assurances behind the scenes to Taiwan, and if President Biden has pushed you to take a tougher stance when it comes to China's posture towards Taiwan.
Good luck.
다행스럽게도
Very fortunately, there was no such pressure. But nevertheless, as for the Taiwan Straits, and especially for the peace and stability in the region, we have shared the same view. And considering the relationship between Taiwan and China, we agreed to engage in cooperation going forward.
You can answer that.
우리 한국 기자.
And also from the Korean press, in the second row from the left. Thank you very much. I am from Yonhap News TV. I would like to ask the both presidents, as the U.S. press has just mentioned, the Israel and Palestinian issue is very important. However, we also see a very importance on the North Korean issue, and is on the Biden's administration's to-do list. Where does the North Korea issue exist? And also, in the roadmap to solve the North Korean nuclear issue, do you also have a shared view on the timeline of the North Korean nuclear policy?
우선
To begin with, the Biden administration, as for the North Korean policy, it is very reviewing these policies at a very fast pace, and it has done very swiftly. And this shows that the North Korean issue was one of the top priorities of the Biden administration's policies. And also in reviewing these policies, we have had close cooperation and coordination and consultation between South Korea and the U.S. And also, the principle of the Biden administration has been already revealed by Washington earlier, and it is based on a pragmatic and also gradual and also a very flexible approach. These are the basic principles of the new Biden administration, and the ROK and the U.S. share the same view, and we will also exert our full efforts to cooperate. As for the timeline for the North Korea's denuclearization, there is no gap between the U.S. and South Korea.
I agree with what the President just said. Our goal is and remains complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We want to make practical progress and increase security in the United States for the United States and our allies. We closely studied what others have tried and what worked and what hasn't worked. And, we're under no illusions how difficult this is, none whatsoever. And the past 4 administrations have not achieved the objective. It's an incredibly difficult objective. As we move forward, we're going to stay in very close coordination with our friends and our partners in the region, including President Moon. And we fully recognize that this is about our collective security in the Indo-Pacific region. And so, but total denuclearization is our objective and remains so. Oh, I get to the next question, huh? I'd like to ask the press a question, if I may. Nancy Cordes, CBS.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I have one question about North Korea and one question about Israel.
We've changed this one question thing, haven't we?
Two foreign policy questions. You have said in the past that you would not meet with Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, without certain preconditions.
Yes.
What are those preconditions, and do you believe he would ever be able to meet them?
Well, what I never do is I never make a judgment what a man or woman is going to do or not do based on what they said. We'll see. If he made any commitment, then I would meet with him, and if there was a commitment on which we met. And the commitment has to be that there's discussion about his nuclear arsenal. And if it's merely a means by which, how do we de-escalate what they're doing? And so if that was the case, I would not meet unless there was some outline made that my Secretary of State and others would have negotiated as to how we would proceed. But what I would not do is I would not do what had been done in the recent past. I would not give him all that he's looking for as international recognition as legitimate and give them what allowed him to move in the direction of appearing to be more, how can I say it, more serious about what he wasn't at all serious about. I'd have to know specifics. But the idea of never meeting with North Korea, I would make sure that my team had met with their counterparts, and I knew exactly what we were meeting on.
And then in the wake of all of your conversations this week, what is your relationship like now with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? Do you have certain expectations that he will bolster the rights of the Palestinian people in some way? And if so, did you convey that to him in your conversations?
One of the reasons why we're able to get the ceasefire in 11 days, they didn't do what other people have done. I don't talk about what I tell people in private. I don't talk about what we negotiate in private. What I can assure you, though, is that the last time it took 56 days and then 6 months to get a ceasefire. I'm praying this ceasefire will hold. I take Bibi Netanyahu when he gives me his word. I take him at his word. He's never broken his word to me. And but what I've made clear is that it's essential. It's essential that the Palestinians on the West Bank be secured, that Abbas be recognized as the leader of the Palestinian people, which he is. Hamas is a terrorist organization. We've recognized that. But that doesn't mean we should not be in Gaza, rebuilding Gaza for all those innocent people who, in fact, have been hurt and have been collateral damage, including loss of homes and a whole range of other things, as well as insisting that Israeli citizens, whether it be Arab or Jew, are treated equally. Israeli citizens, and that's what was going on in Jerusalem. And so that has to come to an end. And Bibi, the Prime Minister, knows my views, but the commitment that was given was immediately kept. From the very beginning, I told him what our objective was, that there needed to be a ceasefire, and he, in fact, kept his commitment in the time frame in which he said he would do it. Thank you. And by the way, I wasn't the only one that spoke to him. I looked down here, every major player on my team, from Secretary of Defense to Secretary of State, all the way down the line, and our National Security Advisor were in constant contact with their counterparts in Israel, in Egypt, and throughout the Middle East. This was not something that was just done with a casual conversation between myself and Bibi. I have presumptuous of me to say this, Mr. President, but I think I've got a great team. And I spent a lot of time with El-Sisi on the phone in Egypt, and they've done a commendable job of bringing Hamas to the table and getting them to agree to a ceasefire as well. Thank you. Is that it?
우리
I think
한국
there's one more question over there.
예, 우리 여성 기자
And also from the Korean press, the female journalist, I think you have raised your hand.
아니 우리 한국은 여성 기자들이 없나요?
Maybe we don't have female journalists from the Korean press today.
예, 안녕하세요. 저 코리아 헤럴드 이지윤
Hi, I
기자라고
am
합니다.
Lee Ji-yoon from Korea
우리
Herald.
국민들께서
I
백신에
believe
대해서
that many
좋은
Koreans
소식을 기다리고 계실 것
are waiting
같은데요.
to have welcoming news on
이번에
the
바이든
vaccine
대통령과
front.
다양한
And during
논의를
your
하신 걸로
talks with Mr. Biden, I
특히
believe that you have
국민들이
had
좋아하실
great
만한, 그리고
dialogue.
대통령께서 가장
And also in regards to
의미 있다고
these
생각하시는
talks,
성과가
what
있다면
is the most
자세히 설명해
welcoming
주시면
news
좋을 것 같습니다.
for the South Korean citizens, and what do you see as the most significant?
그 백신 그 협력에
And
대해서는
as for vaccine
오늘
cooperation
공동
today,
성명과
as
또 오늘
mentioned in
기자회견
the
문을
press
통해서
conference statement,
충분히
as well as
밝혔습니다.
the joint statement,
다시
I have
한번
made it clear.
강조해서
Once again, I would like to
말씀드리자면
highlight
한미 간의
the ROK and the
백신
U.S. has
협력을
agreed
위한
to
글로벌
bolster vaccine
포괄적인
cooperation,
파트너십을
and this is a
이렇게
comprehensive one,
형성하기로
and we have
합의했다는
agreed to
것입니다.
forge such a
미국이
partnership.
가진
And the
백신
U.S.
개발
currently has the
능력과
vaccine
한국이
development
가진
capacity,
바이오
and
의약품
the South
생산
Korea
능력을
has the capacity
결합해서
to develop
백신의
biopharmaceutical
생산을
products.
촉진하고
And together with
그것을
these
통해서
cooperations, we
전
believe that we
세계에
can facilitate
백신
the
공급을
manufacturing
빠르게
of
더
vaccines
많이
and
쉽게
also
하겠다는 것입니다.
increase the
특히
global supply of
인도
COVID-19
태평양
vaccines.
지역의
And especially
백신
for
공급에
Indo-Pacific region,
더
we
많은
will be
기여를
focused and
하게 되리라고
contributing more
생각합니다.
as
그
for the vaccine
과정에서
supply
우리
in this
한국도
specific region.
백신의
In this process,
안정적인
the ROK will also commit to securing more vaccines going forward. And on top of this, we also have talked about with Mr. Biden the alliance, the ROK-US alliance, and he says that the U.S. will directly support and provide vaccines for South Korea, and these aspects will be revealed and announced by Washington going forward.
By the way, I can just prematurely make that. Now, there are 550,000 Korean soldiers, sailors, airmen who work in close contact with American forces in Korea. We'll provide full vaccinations for all 550,000 of those Korean forces engaging with American forces on a regular basis, both for their sake as well as the sake of the American forces. In addition to that, we've talked about the ability to have vaccines produced with our working with, and this is in the offing, working with one of the major vaccine producers in the United States, and where Korea is incredibly sophisticated, and with the help of that particular company will be able to make significant numbers of vaccines for themselves. And lastly, it is my hope and expectation, I cannot commit to it because we don't know for certain, but we think that over the remainder of 2021, we're going to be able to vaccinate every American. We have enough vaccine to vaccinate every American, period, right now. And we're going to be able to do that by the midsummer, and we're going to continue to get more people to engage in seeking the vaccine. I don't believe, I never have believed, that there's a large percentage of Americans who will not take the vaccine. And we're doing very imaginative things, and states are, to get people to show up and have the vaccine. But we believe that between the second half of 2021 and going in through 2022, we could produce as many as another 1 billion doses of vaccine. Because it's not just, and this is what I like about this president, he's not just talking about any more than I'm just talking about the United States or just Korea. He's talking about the Indo-Pacific. He's talking about the world. We, with advanced capabilities, have an obligation to do everything we can to provide for protection of the entire world. I know that is an awfully ambitious proposal, but I think the nations that have that capacity are going to be continuing to work toward getting that done. And so thank you. If you're not asking me a mean one like you usually do.
It's something interesting, I think, that has not come up. President Obama says that there is footage and records of objects in the skies, these unidentified aerial phenomenon, and he says we don't know exactly what they are. What do you think that it is?
I would ask him again. Thank you. Oh. Come on, Rolf, let's go.
Well, that ended on a pleasant note. Let's now go over to Washington, where Presidents Moon and Biden just concluded their series of summits and a joint news conference. Phil Crowther with AP International is live at the White House for us. Is he ready for us? There he is. Phil, South Korean President Moon Jae-in was greeted by U.S. President Joe Biden early this afternoon at the White House as the American leader hosted the second in-person meeting with the world leaders since taking office. So this is as President Biden seeks to turn his foreign policy focus back to East Asia. Why don't you bring us up to speed on what the meet and greet between the two leaders were like and what the ambience was like at the White House from then up until just now?
Well, tell you what, this has been a really long day for the South Korean President Moon Jae-in here in Washington. It started early this morning with a meeting with the Vice President Kamala Harris and only ends now in the early evening here in Washington. According to U.S. President Joe Biden, they got on very well indeed, thereby explaining why this press conference was that little bit late. In terms of the announcements that were made at this press conference, well, some news was made. And you're absolutely right, by the way, that it does look like the Biden administration has somehow managed to get the focus a little bit more towards its pivot, if you will, to Asia, or rather the administration's concentration on Asia in terms of foreign policy and away from the Middle East. You notice there at the press conference it was essentially half of the questions were about North Korea, basically, and half of the questions were about the Middle East, Israel, and the war with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Now, let's have a look at the announcements made, though, by the two presidents, and they are significant because we knew in the forefront of this visit by Moon Jae-in that one of his big priorities was essentially to get vaccines from the United States to South Korea. And we got those concrete numbers from Joe Biden at the very end of the press conference here. 550,000 South Korean soldiers will get full vaccinations from the United States, these being 550,000 South Korean soldiers who have contact with U.S. forces. Now, it's possible that Moon Jae-in might have wanted more vaccines for the population of South Korea, but at this point, no announcements on that front, though both of them did say that there was going to be cooperation when it comes to vaccines between the United States and South Korea. Now, I mentioned North Korea already. Joe Biden did make news there by announcing his new special envoy to North Korea. That's Sung Kim. He is a career diplomat here at the State Department. He knows North and South Korea very, very well indeed. There's also that openness that is worth mentioning, that openness to talk with North Korea on behalf of the United States and on behalf of South Korea, as we already know. And a mention there from Joe Biden, though not directly, of his predecessor's approach to North Korea, who, of course, met twice. Donald Trump met twice with Kim Jong-un. Now, here is what Joe Biden said about that relationship. He's not necessarily willing to meet with Kim Jong-un immediately, but he does not want to give him the international recognition and legitimacy that he got, according to President Joe Biden, from those meetings with his predecessor, Donald Trump. Those are some of the elements that both of these presidents talked about at their press conference and, of course, one presumes during their lengthy discussions here at the White House before they came out to the East Room of the White House.
That's right, Philip. So those are a couple things that obviously were at the top of the agenda, and those are in fact those that President Moon had wanted to discuss with U.S. President Joe Biden. We had largely anticipated the bilateral to center on North Korea, of course, but of course on vaccine procurement by South Korean leader Moon Jae-in as well. But from the U.S. side, what did President Biden anticipate going into the talks, and did he get what he wanted?
Well, you know, that's where it becomes, we have to look a little bit more at the bigger picture, if you will. This is an administration that didn't necessarily want to tackle the Middle East during its first few months of the administration. It wanted to concentrate on Asia and on the Asia-Pacific region. We know that because the first visit by a head of state, or rather head of government, was Japan, of course. And the second one comes from South Korea. That clearly shows the priorities in terms of foreign policy when it comes to this administration. The priorities, of course, putting up a united front against China on the economic front more than anything. China not mentioned at this press conference, but we all know that closer collaboration between the United States and South Korea, and potential closer collaboration with South Korea as part of the emerging Quad group, though that was not mentioned at this press conference, it remains a possibility. All of those are tactics for the United States to put up a united front against China. Again, surprisingly maybe, that China was not mentioned all too directly in this press conference. Taiwan was, but only in a passing mention almost from South Korean President Moon Jae-in. So I think the United States gets out of this meeting pretty much what it wanted. Closer collaboration when it comes to vaccine partnerships, as the United States calls it. A clear united front when it comes to North Korea, the announcement of a new special envoy for North Korea. Possibly a bigger united front when it comes to China as well. Now, what we don't have, though, here at this point are concrete announcements when it comes to investment from South Korean companies in the United States. Those are the types of announcements that are usually made on the sidelines of a meeting like this one, of a bilateral meeting like this one between the United States and South Korea. We will presumably get those details as to which South Korean companies will be investing how much in which areas of the United States geographically, and of course when it comes to technology as well. We don't know that yet, and that is a really big part of the bargain that the United States wanted out of these meetings with the South Korean delegation.
Right. However, we did get an announcement that South Korean conglomerates traveling with President Moon Jae-in will be investing $25 billion worth of investments in the United States. So we'll see the details come out probably in the near future. Phil Crowther, as always, excellent reporting. Thank you so much. Phil Crowther from the White House. Let's now go live to our Blue House correspondent, Kim Min-ji. She's standing by at the nation's top office. Now, Min-ji, if it hadn't been for COVID-19, you and I know that you'd be traveling with the presidential press corps and you'd be in Washington.
Right, Kanyang. Due to COVID-19 restrictions, only 20 poll reporters were allowed to accompany the president, just about a quarter of the number that would usually travel with the president. So the majority of the Blue House press corps is here in Seoul following working by Eastern time. Now, mind you, it's the president's first overseas trip in over a year due to COVID-19. So his entourage and schedule have also been scaled down compared to his previous overseas visits. First Lady Kim Jong-suk also didn't accompany him either, unlike previous 3 trips to Washington. This time, officials say they focused more on the summit itself.
Right, and also the fact that this was an official working visit by the president. Now, today's summit it set the tone for Seoul-Washington relationship, and for the remainder of President Moon's presidency, which is about a year. President Moon was hoping to get a lot out of this visit. Did he get what he wanted?
Well, Moon came to the States hoping to boost cooperation with the U.S. in vaccine cooperation in order to foster South Korea as a global hub for vaccine production. South Korea is one of the world's best when it comes to biological manufacturing production, and coupled with U.S. technology through a bilateral partnership, it was hoping to create a synergy. Another top priority for South Korea was reviving the peace process on the Korean Peninsula and resuming dialogue with North Korea, because we haven't seen any progress since the no-deal Hanoi summit in 2019. Here is the president's opening remarks at head of the expanded summit.
한반도의 완전한 비핵화와 평화 정착을 위해 한국은 미국과 함께 긴밀히 협력해 나갈 것입니다. 쉽지 않은 도전들이 우리 앞에 놓여 있지만 우리 양국은 가치를 공유하는 동맹으로서 코로나 극복, 경제 회복, 기후변화 대응을 비롯한 글로벌 현안에 대해서도 적극 협력할 것이며 새로운 시대를 열어갈 것입니다.
Now, Min-ji, and on to the joint presser, I'd like to note that there were questions taken by the president, and President Moon Jae-in was also asked whether he was pressured by President Biden on the Taiwan and China issue. What did he have to say about these questions?
Right, just moments ago, Moon and Biden read out their statements at a joint press conference. The leaders have agreed on a comprehensive vaccine partnership that they say will be able to provide vaccine supplies to all over the world and in the long term contribute to ending the COVID-19 pandemic. Moon also thanked the U.S. leader for agreeing to provide South Korea with surplus vaccines. The two allies also agreed to step up cooperation in developing growth industries such as semiconductor and EV batteries. And like you said earlier, South Korean companies announced a massive investment plans in the U.S. On North Korea, Moon said the leaders reaffirmed their commitment to work together for complete denuclearization on the Korean peninsula. They agreed to make practical progress on the matter based on diplomacy, and to that end, Biden appointed State Department official Sung Kim as North Korea envoy. They also agreed to work together to address climate change and achieve zero carbon emissions by 2050. Another, abolishing guidelines on South Korea's missile use before the end of Moon's term. Seoul has been banned from firing ballistic missiles with a range of over 800 kilometers under the agreement, which was first signed in 1979 in order to obtain U.S. missile technology. Now, termination of the agreement would pave the way for Seoul's missile sovereignty. Now, the two also agreed to cooperate for security in the Indo-Pacific region. Back to you, Kanyang.
All right, Kim Min-ji from the nation's Blue House. Thank you, Min-ji, for that. So those were our reporters from the White House and the Blue House. So that was a wrap of the president's, two presidents' joint presser. Dr. Go, what really left an impression on you? Was it as impressive as you had imagined?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, both presidents clearly were in good mood. I mean, clearly, hopefully they develop a close personal affinity with each other, and their responses and statements happen to be complementary, which is very good. But then I think there's a little bit of a difference when it comes to the emphasis. President Biden obviously puts more emphasis on upgrading the ROK-US alliance and then making more suitable for future challenges. And I think in that context, he continuously makes mention of the technological partnerships as well as the Indo-Pacific issues. And I think that's something that's lacking from the responses coming from President Moon, who put more emphasis on the agreements that the both sides have reached in the North Korean policy arena. And I think it's very, the bombshell news was that Ambassador Sung Kim was posted to South Korea before. It's now going to be the special envoy to North Korea. That's been an important issue for South Korea because South Korea was feeling that the U.S. government's focus on North Korea has been lacking in terms of priority because there's no action in terms of appointing high-level diplomats for the North Korean issue. So now, Ambassador Sung Kim is going to be the special envoy to North Korea, and he has a long experience in dealing with North Korea, and he visited North Korea many times, and he was at the site of a Yongbyon nuclear complex when back in 2007 or 2009, when North Korea blew up the refrigeration tower. So goodwill gesture and also a sign that North Korea is committed to denuclearization. So the history repeats in many ways, and hopefully with this time we'll have a better outcome.
Right, so it really does seem like President Biden is committed to appointing those seasoned diplomats and those career, officials to their posts. Now, I want to get some analysis of this first face-to-face between Presidents Moon and Biden. I want to bring in Joseph Yoon, one of leading experts on U.S. policy on Korean Peninsula issues. Ambassador Yoon served as U.S. Special Representative for North Korea policy under the two previous administrations. Ambassador Yoon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure joining you today on this very, very historic day, I would say.
Now, Ambassador Yoon, first of all, I'd like your take on the joint press conference and the bilateral summit between the two presidents today.
Yes, I watched it, with quite a bit of interest, and obviously leading up to whole summit itself. And I was struck by a number of things. Number one is really we're back to, I think, traditional, friendly, step-by-step, give and take relationship. And we saw that both from President Biden as well as President Moon. I mean, there are a number of issues that needed airing out, including, of course, the vaccine issue, how to approach North Korea, what to do about China. And so in all of them, I see signs of compromise, that each side got something to take away. For example, in North Korea issues, it's clear that President Moon, of course, wanted to see something a little bit more dynamic and aggressive from the U.S. side. And U.S. side has delivered on some of that, including, for example, appointing Sung Kim, as mentioned by Dr. Ko, but also kind of minimizing the pressure aspect of American North Korea policy. On vaccine issues, there is enormous collaboration, but it is no secret, of course, that President Moon wanted to get some vaccines immediately from the United States. And that's been a big discussion within the administration. Do we give it to friends and allies for political reasons, or should it be based on need? Mm-hmm. And so I think the need side won, but in the end, the hook is that they will give some vaccines, probably limited in number, to the Korean military side. So that probably is about a million vaccines or so, but that's something. So you can see there was a give and take. Now, I expected, and it looks like President Moon came under some pressure on China, and especially to mention items like human rights, democracy, mm-hmm. as well as Taiwan, Hong Kong issues. In the end, I expect that joint statement will mention Taiwan in some form. So again, little bit of give and take. To me, that struck me most was the collaborative nature, that this is no longer a summit based on what America can do for Korea, but also what Korea can do for the United States. And you saw that most clearly on the economic side, where large Korean companies such as Samsung, SK, Hyundai, as well as LG, committed to an enormous amount of investment in United States in sectors that have been suffering, such as semiconductors and also electric vehicle batteries. So I think it was a very substantive visit, and the Korean side can be very happy with it.
Ambassador Yoon, there had been talks about here in South Korea that there would be some sort of a mention about the Panmunjom Declaration in the joint statement, and that the North Korea policy moving forward between South Korea and the U.S. would build upon that. Do you think that what was announced today is an extension of the Panmunjom Declaration of some sort?
Yes, I think there will be mention. I think you're probably likely to see it in joint statement that has yet to come out. So there are some aspects of North Korea policy where President Moon really wanted to see continuation of diplomatic engagement. And we saw that most clearly, 2-3 days ago, when Kurt Campbell, who is in charge of Indo-Pacific at American NSC, said very clearly that U.S. side would respect Singapore joint declaration or a joint statement between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump, and U.S. side will build upon it. And today, I think we're hearing very clearly that American side will also respect and acknowledge the Panmunjom Declaration, So this is a big turnaround, and it does indicate very clearly the American overall attitude that if there is to be denuclearization, it cannot be done by US alone, that it has to be an effort, not just US, but South Korea, China, and others international community will enter it. And this is, of course, a tough task, but I do think US side is showing degree of flexibility and degree of pragmatism that we lacked before. So I think this is a good result for President Moon, and I think it guarantees that there will be continuing consultations between Washington and Seoul. So I think it's good overall. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Now, Ambassador Yoon, you've been with the administration for a very long time, and you've been in that position yourself. President Biden appointed Ambassador Sung Kim as the special envoy for North Korea. What does that say about the Biden administration's approach to North Korea?
I think on personnel, it clearly says Biden team will rely on expertise and experience more than anything else. More than that, the Biden team will rely people currently in the government. So I think, that's in that sense, there is a big difference from Trump team, which really changed senior officials a lot. I mean, in my view, having Sung Kim there is nothing but plus. He has a wealth of experience. He has done this before, both under Trump, Obama, and before that under George W. Bush. So I think that's a great appointment. But also more than that, you look at key personnel in the Biden administration, and they have a depth of experience. People like Kurt Campbell, of course, as well as Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan. I really do think this is a team that will work quietly, but also very, very diligently. And we saw this as they set up. This is, by the way, a very difficult summit because of COVID. And they set up a very difficult summit, and it was a working summit. And you saw all this afternoon, it actually started in the morning. I'm in Washington now with meeting with Vice President Harris, going through a small bilateral meeting, which is mainly between Biden and Moon, and then to expanded bilateral, and then finally to the joint press conference. But before that, the preparation were made by Tony Blinken, Secretary of State's visit to Seoul, and the National Security Advisors meeting. And so you see the careful, scripted work, and I'm very impressed.
Ambassador Yoon, when I was traveling with the Presidential Press Corps to Washington, I was told that everything had been orchestrated, arranged by the team, so Secretary of State and the Foreign Minister on this side, and of course the NIS directors. But the actual conversation between the two leaders really happened when the cameras were out and when the elevator to the private suite closed. What do you think Presidents Biden and Moon discussed today? Because their private meeting extended for longer than anticipated.
I would imagine the private meeting is always focused around what the working level could not agree on, okay? And these will be thorny issues of immediate problem for either side. So I would expect that in the private meeting, there was a lot of talk on vaccine, especially on President Moon's request that really, given everything being equal, there is lack of vaccines in Korea. So please give us some relief. Working together on vaccine partnership, that's good. But right now, we need to get some real vaccines right now, And of course, difficulty is that the US has some, extra AstraZeneca. But what South Korean wants is either Moderna or Pfizer. And so in the US side, that's also very difficult because you provide vaccines for countries that are too poor to afford vaccine. You provide vaccines in countries where death rate is very high. And so Korea has managed vaccine COVID situation very well. And really, if you look at the numbers, adjusted for population, is way below the incident in the United States. So among the health experts, there was a widespread feeling: why should we give vaccines, or should we sell vaccines immediately to South Korea? We should not decide on vaccine distribution based on political affiliation. But of course, on the other side, I would expect that on the political side, State Department officials, NSC officials would say, listen, China, Russia are all doing vaccine diplomacy. Why should we be left out? Plus, friend in need, you have to help them. And Korea is a friend. So I think that issue was unresolved. And finally, an option was brought, which is that as South Korean servicemen, military people, train with Americans, it is in the interest of American military to have South Korean military vaccinated. So I think that's the compromise. And then you would talk about numbers. And so I would imagine vaccine was one issue that they had to discuss and get the approval of both principals in the meeting. Second item I would expect is about dealing with China. South Korea is in a very difficult situation. And of course, US considers now China to be the number one challenge by far. And that it is the only country capable of sustaining challenge to the United States in terms of values, in terms of systems. And so US very much wants to bring in completely South Korea into the alignment, including the Quad. So I would imagine the argument that would take place is, how do we characterize that? How do we put it on paper that gives some signal that South Korea is with the United States? And so I would imagine that it got stuck in language. Can we say, for example, that Hong Kong agreement should be respected? Can we say something on Xinjiang? Can we say something, on Taiwan? So I think in the end, it's the only two presidents who could give and take and decide on exact language. And it looks like exact language that will be mentioned is some kind of maintaining peace on Taiwan Straits. So that's the compromise language. And then there will be similar issues for in North Korea. South Korean side was very much keen to say denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The US position is that South Korea has no nuclear weapons. So we should say denuclearization of North Korea. Mm-hmm. So again, that language, I would imagine, from the sense I get, is settled in favor of President Moon. So I expect to see a joint statement saying denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Right. So I think the language that they settled, as far as I heard from the joint statement, that the two leaders announced was the freedom of navigation in South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. Now, it's in line with what you just mentioned, Ambassador Yoon, but the Quad, there had been a lot of talk ahead of the summit regarding South Korea's joining of the Quad or not. Has there been an official invitation for South Korea to join the Quad, and how do you think South Korea should navigate these very delicate waters in terms of dealing with this issue?
Well, Quad is not an official organization like, for example, NATO or UN. So there is no official invitation. You're not going to see a Quad letterhead going, saying, we're speaking on behalf of Quad. Would you like to join? No, that's not going to happen. Quad is what I call an informal organization among very like-minded countries. And there is a bit of a debate going on in US. Is it about security? Is it about military? I think US government officials would argue that no, it's not. It's about providing public good. It's about providing, freedom of navigation. It's about promoting human rights, promoting democracy, promoting open society. It doesn't exclude anyone. And so really, that shouldn't be an issue. But of course, China sees it as an organization or as a grouping that is aligned against them. And so they would react very badly if there was any language saying that Korea would work with Quad to further, freedom of navigation in Taiwan Straits, for example. That would be unacceptable to China. However, Quad has recently agreed to form some working groups to work on pandemics, to work on cybersecurity, to work on technology issues. So I think the compromise there again would be for South Korea to join some of these working groups where South Korea has obvious interest. And so I think that's the way to get around it. Look, as far as United States is concerned, South Korea is an ally of the United States. There are 29,000 American troops in South Korea. So there is no question, as far as the US is concerned, that South Korea is aligned with the US on values issues, as well as on systems issues, such as rule of law, such as open trade. And so I think it's a matter of kind of moving towards it. So while South Korea works with the United States on many things, South Korea can also tell China that we're not going to join anything that resembles a military alliance against China. And certainly, I don't think anyone in the American government would say Quad is like Asian NATO.
I think we saw a very unique bilateral summit and relationship between the two countries this time around, and I'm sure quite different from when you were at the negotiations table as well, Ambassador Yoon. As in the previous days, it had been the North Korea issue, a military alliance issue, or the free trade agreement issue that took top stage at these summits. Now that alliance seems to have been extended to everything between fighting COVID, infectious disease, climate change, space cooperation. What are your thoughts on this?
I agree with you. I think we are seeing a very different summit meeting with each side helping each other. And, I'm trying to think, what is so different about it? And the thing that strikes me is, of course, US now has a center-left government. Same with South Korea, center-left government. Previously, we had a bit of a mismatch with Trump, obviously, with center-left government, and even with Obama, center-right government in South Korea. The last time this kind of political alignment was there was really Kim Dae-jung and Bill Clinton. So I'm thinking that there is something to having similarly thinking principles. That's a president who think similarly in terms of political structure, in terms of political thought. So I think there is something to that. And I think in Joe Biden especially, you have to appreciate that, he has been through a lot. He's seen a lot. He knows foreign policy. I would say he's really the first president U.S. has had in a long time, who sees himself as a foreign policy expert. I mean, certainly Trump was not it, Obama was not it, and probably George W. Bush was not it. The last time when we had a president who really felt comfortable in foreign policy, I think was George W. Bush, not George W. Bush, the Bush Senior, George H.W. Bush. So I think that makes a difference. And so I think we saw some of that result today. The second reason I do think is personnel matters. And we have very experienced personnel in both the NSC as well as the State Department. And so they have gone about it very diligently. I mean, if I can add one more, this is President Moon is the second VIP to visit White House. And of course, the first one was Prime Minister Suga about a month ago. And so these are the only two visitors to White House. And that, to me, speaks volumes about the importance Biden administration attaches to Asia, and in particular to the alliance partners. There is no question that Biden's goal is to make sure our alliances are strong. And in order to do that, he's going to try his best to accommodate the concerns of our alliance partners. And we saw that with vaccines, we saw that with North Korea, and we'll keep on seeing it. So there was a lot of give and take, and in the end, we have a good result.
All right, Ambassador Joseph Yun, many thanks for your insights and expertise today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
Now, Dr. Go, so we heard from Ambassador Joseph Yun. What are some thoughts that you agree or disagree with?
No, actually, I totally agree with Ambassador Yun in terms of assessing this summit as a success. I mean, it's not a historical success, I would say, but we went into this summit with some concern that there could be an emergence of disagreements between the two presidents, especially when it comes to China. And then, but I think South Korea and the United States have been successful in minimizing the sources of friction, which is the Taiwan issue. I think the compromise, which is South Korea saying that it supports the freedom of navigation in the Taiwan Strait without really addressing the more sensitive issues of Xinjiang and Hong Kong, the human rights issues, is probably a plus for South Korea, and then it probably assuages some concerns in Seoul that this summit could signal like a reversion of South Korea away from its closer approachment with Beijing in the past. But besides that, I think I would the one point of disagreement that with Ambassador Yun is about the vaccine outcome. I think Ambassador Yun is saying that I mean, he's been very polite and then qualified about assessing the agreement over, or lack of agreement over vaccine supply for South Korea. But I think South Korea also got something positive out of it. I think South Korea went into this summit with two objectives. One is the so-called vaccine swap idea. So essentially, that was the idea that South Korea would get priority in getting the vaccines from the United States for the short period, for this month and next month, and eventually South Korea would return the favor by producing more vaccines for the United States and other countries. But the other idea, which I apparently decided this time didn't really work out because South Korea is only getting 500,000 doses, which is not going to be enough to address the demand that exists here right now.
And for Korean forces working with the US forces.
Very limited purposes. But then on the other hand, the second objective, which was to make South Korea the vaccine production hub for the world, has been successful. And so, I think the Biden administration has essentially agreed that the South Korea will be a vaccine production hub. So I think that's good news for President Moon, as he can come back to Seoul and then emphasize this successful outcome.
Absolutely. Now, I think we are seeing the groundbreaking ceremony from the Korean War Wall of Remembrance, and President Moon Jae-in is making a speech, so let's turn it over.
The U.S., the spirit of the U.S. has made progress in the world, and 72 years ago, the U.S. young men of the U.S. has ran all the way to the Korean Peninsula. They did not know anything about the country. They have never met the people of Korea. However, they participated in the war, and they were the sons and daughters of America. And they were also the descendants of the great U.S. heroes. Thanks to their dedication and sacrifice, Korea was able to achieve democracy and also progress, especially the peace on the Korean Peninsula as well. Nevertheless, we had to see many sacrifices of such heroes. And especially for this Korean War Veterans Memorial Wall, we have the names of more than 440,000 people's name engraved in this wall, which will be remembered eternally. And in the year of 2018, I have also pledged to construct such a memorial wall to the UN war veterans. And 3 years have passed, and today I am very grateful to be able to come with this pledge. And we have many veterans who are joining us today. I would like to once again extend my deepest respect and also highlight that your sacrifice was never in vain. And I would like to mention this clear as the President of the Republic of Korea. Still, there are many longings for the loved ones, and there are many bereaved families. And I also extend my deepest words of comfort. Even these challenges, there were also the Korean War Veterans, the Federation, the Association, as well as the chairperson and the staff members, and also the association in South Korea. And there were also the corporations and also many civilians. I would like to extend my deepest appreciation for making this opportunity possible. And we also are joined by the Secretary of Defense and also the mayor of Maryland and also the governor, that is. And I would like to thank you once again for your efforts and participation. And today I have mentioned and I have met with Mr. Biden, and Mr. Biden has mentioned in his inaugural address the power and the spirit of the modeling of the U.S. The U.S. was able to change and transform the world with its own spirit and power. And based on this principle of foundation of the nation, this has become also the great principles, the universal principles of the globe as well. And under these principles, the South Koreans also now were able to feel and also feel with the spirit of the U.S. And at the challenges of the war, there were the help of the war veterans. And back in the war, U.S. General also has said that there were the many efforts put forth by the U.S. soldiers, and he also held hands of the Korean citizens. And he also mentioned that winning from the war is not only having the swords or the guns being stationed at each other, but it is all about saving lives. And he has given more support and also more aid to these war-stricken countries, South Korea. And now my hometown, the city of Busan, now houses the only UN memorial cemetery, and he is laid to peace at this specific place together with many other war veterans. And thanks to their sweat, their blood, had and their steadfast alliance and cooperation, we have had the ironclad alliance between ROK and U.S. And currently, we are also witnessing the descendants following on and carrying on this spirit. And the ROK-U.S. alliance has now been developing into a collaborative and a comprehensive one, encompassing economy and political and society as a whole. And now the two countries uphold the values of human rights, democracy, and we are moving forward to achieve a more stronger and robust democracy. And currently, the entire world is faced with the global challenges of COVID-19 as well as the climate change. Nevertheless, we have the solidarity and the unity, and this is why we can hope for great progress going forward. And this specific hope is not only working for U.S. but also for the rest of the world. The ROK and the U.S. has shared tragic moments, especially and also the very victorious moments as well. At every moment when we need the alliance, the ROK will stand next to the U.S. and also members of the war veterans and the bereaved families. Since my inauguration, during my first visit to the U.S., I went to the hero Jang Jin-ho's war memorial, and we also shared the same heart in memorial, sending the memorials of these war veterans and the war heroes. And also last year, we have had the return of the 5 war remains of the U.S. to the U.S. And it is very meaningful that we were able to return the remains to the bereaved families. And this also made us feel very fortunate. And even as this moment, we would also like to return even the last person, the last remains of the war veterans who fought in the Korean War to the U.S. And also starting from last year up until this year as well, we are dispatching and mobilizing more personnel to recover the war remains. And also during the first North Korea and the U.S. Singapore talks, we have had the 55. We have more than 5 dozen of those war remains that have been returned to the U.S. from North Korea. And going forward, we will also engage in continued dialogue with North Korea as well. The Arlington Cemetery as well, we believe that this is the symbol of where the war, actually the memorial of the fallen heroes begin with the remembering of their sacrifices. We can never forget their sacrifices, and we shall also remember eternally the sadness and the tragic moments that the bereaved families had to go through. And together we are standing next to shoulder to shoulder, and we hope that our descendants going forward will also meet to these spirits as well. And in the 1950s, many Americans have fought together, and the names of these people shall be remaining and shall be remembered eternally. And the Republic of Korea knows the invaluable assets and the values of these fallen heroes, and these will be carried out going forward. And to all of you, I wish for your happiness and health going forward. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen.
So that was President Moon Jae-in at the groundbreaking ceremony of the Korean War Veterans Memorial Wall of Remembrance in Washington, D.C. The wall is a long-planned addition to the existing Korean War Veterans Memorial in D.C. Now, Dr. Go, what is your take on that? President Moon has been making visits to various places where he highlighted the strong alliance between South Korea and the U.S., and this is an addition to that.
So I think President Moon tends to emphasize the symbols of strong U.S.-ROK alliance, as well as the history of the U.S.-ROK alliance, because of the fact that he has been, at least the support base where he comes from has been traditionally been suspected of being having a leaning anti-American a bit, and I think he's trying to essentially engaging in political acts to assuage some concerns that some American conservatives might have about, the true political motivations of some of his supporters. I think this kind of performance is accentuated under President Moon's presidency, and in comparison to other Korean presidents for that reason. So essentially, it addresses the two audiences here: one domestic in South Korea, as well as the domestic audience in the United States.
Now, I want to go back to the joint statement that was made during the joint presser after the summit. There was a mention of by President Moon Jae-in about the two leaders' joint commitment to OPCON transfer and an abolishment of missile guidelines. What do you say about that?
So I think there are more complete details about the lifting the limit on the missile guidelines rather than the OPCON transfer. But I think President Moon and President Biden, they have agreed to keep talking about continuing the OPCON transfer process, and then also lifting the missile guidelines. And I think, because both issues are quite controversial, especially when it comes to OPCON transfer, even though people have more eyes and interest on the lifting the missile guidelines. So I think the OPCON transfer part, we know that the discussion's been going on before, and the agreement was that, the consensus, was that it would be very difficult to achieve complete OPCON transfer before the end of President Moon's presidency, which is slated to take place next year. But then the reason is because the United States government and the South Korean government agreed that they should change the OPCON transfer process from one based on timeline, very hard time limit on transfer, to something based on conditions. And the conditions are not being met currently. And these conditions are referred to increasing and strengthening South Korean military's capability to take up the job of the U.S. military. And then this job has become more sophisticated and complicated in the last 5 or 10 years because of growing North Korea's nuclear threat. So for that reason alone, the OPCON process has been delayed. So I think even though President Moon would like to finalize the OPCON transfer before the end of his presidency, it's unlikely. But I think the Biden administration maybe is trying to speed up some of the ways for South Korean military to meet those conditions. And as for the missile guideline limits, I think if there hasn't been, there could be a concrete agreement on lifting the limits, but if there hasn't been an agreement on that, that could be because lifting the limit on the missile range at this moment will be too provocative in a way, both towards North Korea and China. So maybe there's a clear agreement that the direction in which the South Korea's missile capability should be headed, meaning that South Korea should augment its missile capability. But I think the United States might be a little bit hesitant to publicize that at the moment. Maybe they think stage too soon.
So you think that may be conditional?
I don't think so. I think eventually meaning in the near future, I think the United States government will allow South Korea to develop like a missile capability without restrictions. But then I'm making the announcement right now at a moment when there's a lot of sensitivity regarding not just North Korea, but also over Taiwan and South Korea at this summit making a strong commitment. A formative commitment, not strong, but a formative commitment to the with the U.S. policy regarding China. I think that the U.S. government might think it's actually too sensitive to publicize this idea of lifting the limit on missile guidelines at this present juncture.
Now, President Moon Jae-in also mentioned partnership in space as well as a strong nuclear power cooperation.
Oh, yeah. So those are, I was also really surprised that this was mentioned because space issue is a little bit of a complicated issue because there are civilian side and the military side to this. I think President Moon is referring to the civilian side. There is some talk of South Korea sending its own mission to Moon. South Korea always had strong ambitions regarding space. because it has a military significance as well. But I think more specifically, I think it's referring to the Project Artemis and sending back the man to the moon. And I think South Korea would like to have a role in that, which is a project carried out by the United States government.
Right, NASA.
Yeah, NASA. And when it comes to the military significance of the space exploration, if South Korea would like to have a faster transfer of Afghan from the United States, it has to develop satellite-based, space-based surveillance capabilities, essentially spy satellites. So these two things, so civilian development and military development, go hand in hand. So in that sense, I think it's not surprising that President Moon has made mentions of that.
What about the nuclear power cooperation?
Nuclear power cooperation.
And tapping into another market.
So that was the very, surprising coming from President Moon, whose electoral platform, the current policy platform, is based on the reducing South Korea's energy reliance on nuclear power. So I think it's referring to the need for South Korea to, as you said, exploit the export potential of its nuclear technology. And this actually is connected to the idea of meeting climate change goals. You need to have nuclear powers in order to reduce CO2 emissions. And I think the Biden administration, even though they put emphasis on the renewable energy, such as solar power and wind power, we cannot really take the nuclear energy out of the mix. Especially if you want to meet the goals about zero CO2 emissions by 2050, then you need nuclear power for that. And South Korea possesses the cutting-edge nuclear power technology. In much of that is due to the fact that United States has stopped constructing new nuclear power plants in the last couple of decades. So South Korea comes with the technology and the capability. So I think President Moon has been, in a way, compared to acknowledge that South Korea is a nuclear power in the civilian side, obviously, and has a lot to contribute, not only because of the export market potentials.
Well, how big of an investment is it by the South Korean conglomerates of $25 billion US? Is it as big as anticipated, or is it bigger or smaller?
So it's a little bit smaller than anticipated, actually. I think the numbers that was being thrown out before the joint press conference, as well as joint press conference, was in the tune of $40 billion. The number came down a little bit, 25 billion, quite a bit, almost by 40%. But then 25 billion is a substantial figure. Obviously, clearly President Biden would like to hear that, and then he emphasized over and over. So again, during the press conference, President Biden was actually intermixing messages towards the domestic audience as well as the messages to South Korea. And therein, he emphasized the fact that he has succeeded in attracting investments from key allies such as South Korea. And that's actually not that different from what President Trump used to do. So, but on the other hand, this $25 billion investment is actually significant, but at the same time, it pays in comparison to the magnitude of investment that Samsung alone is making in creating a more like preparing for the next generation of a semiconductor production. I read that the number that they are talking about is in the tune of $50 billion by a single company, but it's spread over many years, obviously. So in that sense, I think this is just it's a way for South Korean conglomerates to establish a beachhead in the North Korean economy. I'm sorry, in the North Korean economy. I take that back, big time, the big mistake there. American economy, especially when the Biden administration is making a concerted effort to expand investments and production in 5G and other fourth industrial revolution technologies.
Overall, the joint statement looks to have been carefully orchestrated by seasoned career diplomats because it covers a whole range of issues from North Korean nuclear issues to geopolitical issues, economic issues, climate change, shared values, and then it ends up with K-pop. I don't know if President Biden knows much about K-pop, and I don't know whether he knows BTS, but he definitely knows Jung and the Oscars and Parasite. So that highlights the kind of people-to-people exchanges and the cultural exchanges that will further develop between the two countries. I also want to note that Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen was present at the expanded summit. I don't think I have seen the Fed chair present at an expanded summit in the previous couple of years. So that was another thing to note. Maybe it's because we're living in the time of COVID and economic recovery is all that more important. And so we'll have to make more analysis in the coming days. But all in all, I think it was a well-rounded summit and joint statement, and I don't know if you agree with me, but if you were to give a grade?
I'll definitely give an A minus, especially because even though South Korea has been able to achieve one of its key objectives of getting a substantial vaccine supply from the United States, I mean, the President Biden and the President Moon has been able to show that they're on the same page when it comes to key and critical issues of North Korea and even China. The United States has confirmed that, reaffirmed again here in the joint conference that South Korea is in a very special situation in between China and the United States, and the United States is not going to unilaterally pressure South Korea to join each side. And that's a key accommodation, I would say, that I think President Moon will find very flattering, and he'll be able to therefore to evaluate this summit as being a major success.
Right, so the message was clear. There's no daylight between Seoul and Washington at this point. All right, well, that is a wrap of Arirang News special live coverage of the first in-person bilateral summit between President Moon and U.S. President Biden. I'd like to thank our wonderful analyst here, Dr. Ko Myung-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the ASEAN Institute for Policy Studies, for providing us your insights and expertise and your time early this morning. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And all of you, our viewers, for staying with us all throughout this coverage. We have another team coverage coming up of President Moon Jae-in's 5-day visit to Washington and his summit outcome with U.S. President Joe Biden throughout the morning. Join us again at 11 a.m. Korea time, 10 p.m. Eastern. I'm Moon Gan-young Jennifer. Wherever you are in the world, stay safe and stay strong. We'll get through this. Take care.